Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the latter part. This one is kind of a little bit of a sad moment as well as another review. This is Arigato from Ludonaught Games, who sadly have announced that they're not going to be making games anymore. This is the company that brought us all the Colt Express line, and also, in particular for me, the Living Forest line, which I think is still a really good game. And even Precognition I found was kind of underrated. It was a little fiddly, but I still found it a cool little card game. Well, they've got two more games, and then that's it. Arigato and Limit, which is on my couch downstairs as another one that I intend to review. So I'm kind of hoping that we can at least send them off with some, good games. Although, of course, on this policy here, if the game's not good, I'm going to say it's not good. So hopefully these two will win me over. Well, this is a nice, simple game, basically involving you like drawing cards and drafting artisan cards. So these artisans will produce resources that you need in order to give to other artisan cards in order to make offerings to the Shogun, who's got a birthday coming up. Whatever, it's a theme, it's a clever little card game. And the idea is that it's all about, over 12 rounds, playing these cards in such a way that you discard some for resources, pass some to another player, and keep one for its special ability. And you've got to be able to chop and choose which cards you're going to use for what. So they've got sort of multi-use aspect, but it's meant to be quick, 45 minutes, and can be played with 1 to 5 players. It's even on Board Game Arena if you want to try it. So is this one any good? Let's find out.
Get on with it.
So the way Arigato works is that you will play this over 12 rounds, of which there is an objective that if you meet at the end of each round, you'll gain a bonus token which scores at the end of the game. So that's one way of scoring points. But the main way is by the use of these artisan cards. So to start with, you will draw 5 cards. In subsequent rounds, you will draw 3. And the idea is that they have this cool sort of watercolor style artwork of anime characters on it, effectively. I mean, it looks very anime-like. And the idea is that they come in 5 different colors. Each one corresponds to a type of good. So one makes a little bonsai tree, one makes a little origami, one makes little statues, one makes katanas, that kind of thing. And what you would then have to decide what to do with these cards is 2 of them you have to discard, and they will produce their corresponding resource. So I could get rid of the blue and the red, it will make a firework and an origami piece. I then have to decide which one of the others to keep, and I might be like, well, maybe I'll keep this green one here. And you have a village tile where you can place 4 cards around, but they have restrictions as to where you can place them. But let's say I place this one here. It tells me on the icon that if I was to pass 2 of the same color to the next player, I would get 2 favor points, which favor is basically, bonus victory points. But, the 2 cards that you have left over are then passed to the player on your left. So there's an element of drafting and an element of multi-use cards. Once you have placed your card and chosen your cards appropriately, you'll collect your resources for the ones that you've discarded. Any abilities will now key off. But if you can meet the criteria for the artisan on the card with the resources that you have, you will cash in those resources and place an offering token on the artisan. This artisan could then stay there if you want it to keep its ability, or you can transfer it over to your palace, which is effectively a collecting ground where you will be able to place multiple cards throughout the game, hopefully, and each of them will score victory points based on the card. So when you move them over there, it's up to you, but you've only got 4 spaces in your village, and these have, a lot of them have restrictions on where they can go, so you may have to move them eventually to free up space. At the end of each round, as I said, there is an objective, like say have so many cards in your palace, have certain types of colours here, have a bunch of items, and if you meet it, you'll get a little token which basically scores at the end of the game on a progressive scale. And the game basically carries on for 12 rounds in that fashion, at which point you will then total up the favour points of all the stuff that is in your palace, all the favour tokens you've collected through people's abilities as the game goes on, and said objectives, of which this is a double-sided tile, so they will slightly alter depending. And the one with the most?
Of course!
Yeah, not a lot to explain. This is a very easy card game. Not a lot of rules involved. If anything, the more fiddly aspect of learning this game is the iconography itself, because all the iconography is explained on the back of the book. I would much rather that there was a player reference aid. But then when you read the book, it says that, as well as being on Board Game Arena, so you can play it on there, I think there might even be a tutorial on there, but it also says download the player aid in the score sheet. Well, thankfully, we've got a score sheet in the box, so that's not a big deal, but you can download a reference aid. The reference aid is not in the box, though, and the reference aid doesn't have the iconography guide. It's a reference aid for the turn sequence and what you do with the cards. Now, the reference aid is great, but why is that in the box? Why do I have to go to a separate QR code? I mean, you can make little wooden resource pieces and all these cards and these little tiles and that. So why have you got to be slightly tight and not put a reference aid in the box? which is probably one of the most critical components you can have for any game. Now, that being said, if you were to scan the back page of this and print it out and laminate it, and then also print out the reference aids that are on this QR code and print and laminate them, you'll have a complete setup that works quite well. It's just annoying that I have to jump through a few hoops to do that myself, when really they should have put it in a box. You know, just a bit of a gripe. But that being said, other than the iconography, which is not the most intuitive, you know, you will have to refer to this quite a bit, it's still not the most complicated game in the world. But the real meat of this game is the cards. You will draw these cards, you'll have 5 at the start, and then because you'll have passed 2 to another player and discarded 2, and, you know, retained another one, you will basically draw 3 cards from the deck, but then you will get the 2 that were passed from your neighbor. So 2 might have been waiting for me on here, so I'll get these 2 and add them to the 3 I've just drawn. And the idea is that you do have to think quite hard about what you're going to do with these cards, because you want to do everything, but you can't. And I like these multi-use cards in these sort of games, where I've got to decide, right, well, I could use that for that resource, but it is a cool ability. But if I use that for its ability, then I don't have that resource, which I need in order to satisfy this guy's condition. Where can I even put it on my board? I mean, this guy has to be here. You know, I want to use this guy. But wait, I can't even put him on my board because I've got, you know, too much in the slots already. Or in that case, I better discard him. Or maybe I don't need a statue, but then do I want to give it to the opponent on my left? Because if I give them purples, they're kind of hunting for purples, so I'm not sure I want to give them purples. What do I do? And this is something you will be thinking about every turn, and it's very cool. I do like this aspect, having to think about 3 different things. What am I going to keep for an ability? What am I going to pass? And what am I going to discard? All 3 are pretty important. You know, you don't want to give your opponent stuff that they want, because it's just going to make their lives easier, but then they obviously have that same thought for you. But then you need resources. The resources are quite tight in this game, and the abilities are cool, but you can only have 4 of them max at any one time. And even then, if you want to get victory points, you are going to need to get them into your palace, because anything that's left here ain't worth jack at the end of the game. But you might have stuff there that generates points outside of the palace, so you want them around. But then there's 12 rounds in the game. You've only got 4 spaces. You're going to have to chop and change them a little bit. So it's a very tight game where the decisions you make are very impactful, and you know that in itself is really cool. There's a good, reasonable variety of the abilities. They are rinse repeat in some respects, but they apply to different colors, different placements, different types of resources, and it is very fulfilling if you can get a combo going. The problem is that getting the combo going is a little bit on the, it requires a little bit of divine intervention at times. This is a common complaint I have seen with this game, and the designer has even come onto Board Game Geek and said his thoughts on this. There is a bit of a luck aspect to this game, because there is no mitigation for drawing a bad hand. If you've got cards that want, say, green cards, or you've got something that gets you points for putting blue cards in the palace, that kind of thing, or you're just you really desperately need a yellow resource, a yellow katana, yes, you can convert 2 of the same thing into 1 of something else, but that only works so far, especially when the resources are quite tight. You can only hold on to 7 of them in a round. Some of these guys want 5 resources in order to put them in your palace. You know, you do find sometimes that you'll basically have a situation where you go, all right, I'll draw these 3 cards, get these 2 off my neighbor, and they're all useless for what I need. But what can you do? You gotta use them somehow. And it makes the game very tactical, but it also means that trying to plan out some kind of a long-term strategy is very difficult, because you may have some combo that you're trying to build, but then the cards just don't let you finish off the combo. The designer has kind of said that the reason they did this is because they wanted people to kind of enjoy the aspect of planning ahead for these objectives, rather than hoping on the turn the objective turns up that they can meet it. That's all well and good, and you do need to make this clear to players before you start the game, that you really do need to plan for these objectives. You can't just hope that in one round you'll come up to it and go, oh yeah, I can probably meet that. No, you need to know what you're doing. This game rewards some forward planning in this regard, and if you ignore these objectives, well, then kiss your score goodbye, because frankly, you will not survive, especially in the solo mode. We'll get to that a bit later. But there is sadly no mitigation to make up for the luck of a bad draw. Now, you've only got to draw 3 cards from the deck. The other 2 you're getting from your opponent, but if they're playing the game well, they're not going to give you stuff you really want, and 3 cards from the deck does not allow for a lot of variety per se. In solo mode, you will basically draw 5 cards from the deck every round, so you're basically utilizing that. You don't have a person to pass to, but the way the solo works is that every time you pass 2 cards that normally would go to another player, instead you stack them by color next to you, and essentially what happens is you add up the points value of 4 of the 5 highest colors that are there, so the lowest one is not included, and that's your target score you have to beat in 12 rounds. The problem is, the solo mode is damn near impossible! Jesus! I mean, this thing wants you to score 90 to 110 points, depending on what cards you shove there. I mean, it wants you to score a really high value. That is impossible to do without doing pretty well on these objectives. You will not make up that kind of score in what you put in your palace and what you might be able to conjure from these cards at all. You need to do well in all the aspects to get that kind of score. And the problem is, because there is a lot of luck of the draw, you just find that the deck just does not throw you what you need in order to let you do the objectives. You plan ahead for them, and then it's like, well, I can't because I need to do this, and what else am I supposed to do? And so the solo mode's got a very cool, scoring system, and I do like the fact that you are choosing what to do with the cards, but your chances of winning do feel like a bit of a lottery crapshoot. That's basically a roll of a die before you start, and it's like, did you roll a 6 before when you started the game? No? Well, then you lose, because trust me, we ain't going to give you what you need. And that sours the experience a bit. In multiplayer, it's still apparent, but it's not quite as bad because you've got the drafting aspect. Plays up to 5 players, and all the rounds are simultaneous, which is pretty cool. It does actually keep the time length down. About 45 minutes is a typical game, and even with 5 players, 45 minutes is kind of achievable. You've got a bit of scoring to do at the end, but it doesn't take that long to score up, frankly. I mean, you've just got to look at a chart, count up what's in your palace, and count up the tokens. Scoring is pretty quick, and it doesn't take a long time to explain the rules, although you will have to pass this quite a while, although I suspect anybody who gets this game will need to sort out getting those references I mentioned and maybe laminating this. But, to play this with 5 players actually doesn't take that much longer than playing it with 3 or 4, frankly. Yes, I know that the lowest common denominator is your slowest player, but there's only so much slowness you can do here. There's a little bit of AP maybe, but with the 5 cards, it doesn't usually take you too long to figure out, right, I definitely can't use these 2 cards, so these are probably the ones I'm passing over. What you do with the other 3 may take more time, particularly if you really want the cool ability and you're trying to think ahead, but I've never found that this game drags on too long. It doesn't really outstay its welcome. It does a pretty good job of keeping to time. The artwork is nice. I like the watercolor style artwork, although if you've played a game like Kanagawa in the past, I find that watercolor works. I think it's watercolor. I mean, if not, it's something else, but certainly the box cover and a few of these other bits look like watercolor, but I find that they suit scenery more. Like, that is a really nice picture on the cover, but I'm not sure it suits the characters on here well. And you've got like sort of greyish backgrounds with almost what looks like a sort of sketchbook style artist rendering. I mean, they're decent, they're fine, and they certainly will appeal to any anime fans, myself included, and they look nice. But I think it's just more of a stylistic choice that I'm not sure works perfectly for this. But it's not that they're bad. They're perfectly decent. They're perfectly good. It's just me being nitpicky from a style front. But as I say, they look nice. And the card stock is pretty good quality. I don't think you'll need to sleeve these. But if you do, they'll still fit in the box just fine. Everything else is nice. Little wooden shaped tokens of different colours. They're pretty good. So everything's produced quite nicely for what is a relatively cheap game. It wasn't, this was a review copy. So thank you very much for providing one. But it didn't sell for that much. I think it was only like 20-25 euro tops at Essen, so pretty good going. So overall it's a pretty solid game, but that luck aspect is still a bit of a problem. I do wish that there was more you could do to make up for a bad hand of cards, because that does sour some people's experiences. The designer, I believe, has come up with a little variant on Board Game Geek that you can use, although it's not official. It's just something he said in a passing thread. You can look it up. There's not that many forum threads there and you'll find it, but I do feel like maybe there should be a variant in this game to allow for some of that mitigation to go away. And I think the game would improve dramatically with some of that mitigation. But even with that included, for a 45-minute game that you can play with up to 5 players, solo if you really want a masochistic hard time, and it's produced well and relatively simple with still some good decision space, it does the job nicely. It's not blowing my mind. I think that lack of mitigation aspect is a problem, and I do see that crop up and ruin people's days, more often than I would like. But for a relatively short game, it doesn't bug people too much. It's just, it just it could have been better. It could have been even better. But I would give this a 7 out of 10. It's a good game, and I do recommend people give this one a try. It's it's a nice, simple design with a good amount of decision space. It just needed more mitigation to make up for those bad draws of cards. I feel like if it had that, if it had a variant that worked with it, like a gamer's variant or something, this could easily rise to an 8 out of 10, maybe even higher, because the decision space with the drafting and the using abilities and discarding for resources is really cool. It is nice, it's clever, and it's not too complicated. It would have been nice if you put reference aids in the box instead of making me use a QR code, and maybe put that on your reference aid, because that's kind of the most important bit, and there's a few little gripes here and there, but overall, it's not a bad little card game. I was pleased to play this. I might even hang on to it for a while and see how it goes, but failing that, it's on Board Game Arena if necessary, so yeah, it's just a nice, clever card game. So, starting good for Ludonauts' final lot. We'll see what Limit's like in the long run, but, in some point in the next couple of months, I'm kind of intrigued to get to that one. I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how that pans out. But for now, Arigato is a pretty sweet little card game. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out the rest of my content. I've recently done a review for Sanctuary, so if you want to see my full review on that, then by all means do so. And there's more Essen content to come, including, as I said, Ludonauts' other swan song game, Limit, which I look forward to getting to in due course. So until next time, remember, regardless of whether you prefer to make bonsai trees or katanas for the Shogun, I guess he's getting sick and tired of these presents by now, it's still only a game, so bye for now.